Sweetlands is a heavyweight, low interaction city building and worker placement game with a streamlined and puzzly solo mode. I made an abridged playthrough of the game, so please go check that out. Let me emphasize, it's abridged. I play through rounds 1 and 2, then I play rounds 3 and 4 off camera, but I come back for the 5th and final round. For this video, I'm going to assume you've watched my playthrough, or you at least understand the rules to Sweetlands. Also keep in mind, these are my first impressions. I have not played the game enough to make any kind of final judgment. Okay, with that out of the way, let me start by saying that I've really enjoyed my games of Sweetlands, and I look forward to playing more. The art and production are wonderful. There's lots of colorful printed wooden components, and the cardboard tiles and player boards are all very solid. No complaints there. I did read a comment that said they thought the cards looked a bit plain, and that is true. They're very sort of functional. There's not any art on there or anything, but it's kind of understandable considering there are over 200 cards in that giant stack. And considering there's just a ton of icons in this game, it's nice that those cards are just very clear and easy to understand. I also found the gameplay to be really satisfying. As I always say, the best heavy board games have a simple core, and Sweetlands is just a great example of that. On your turn, you're either going to spend money to play a card and take the action that's on the card, or you're going to take one of those worker placement actions and spend either 1, 2, or 3 cards, depending on whether you place it in the first, second, or third slot. When you're done taking actions, or you only have 1 card left, you'll pass. You might get some bonuses. You'll score up your city and your industrial points. Now, there's a lot going on with the actions, right? Some of the actions, there's some complexity there. But for the most part, I found Sweetlands to be relatively easy to learn. Like I said, there are a lot of icons, so that is a bit of a hurdle. But once you understand that basic flow, and then you kind of learn how the actions work, it all makes sense, it all comes together. It plays, I think, a lot easier once you've got it under your belt than the weight would suggest. It feels like one that I'll be able to jump back into in a month from now and not really need to go over the rules that much. It seems like I'll pretty much remember how it all works, because it is fairly straightforward and intuitive. I mean, the worker placement actions are really simple. It's just pay this to get this, right? They're pretty obvious. The actions on the cards require a little bit of interpreting the icons. It's nice on the back of the manual. They have all the icons and what they mean laid out for you. So you can consult that and you can pretty much work out what all the cards mean. I had a couple of questions here or there, but I think they did a really good job making that all make sense. And I like the actions that you're doing. You know, you're putting out those terrains face down. Then you need to put out those roads in order to flip them over, get a little bonus. And then you can place the houses on top of those. Get 3 different houses together to form a city. The different terrains give you different resources or move you on different tracks. I thought that worked really well, having your sort of resource income tied to your exploration, as it were, on the map. I think my biggest criticism is simply that this is a fairly abstract game. Again, someone in the comments mentioned that the theme of this being a candy land that we're creating doesn't really come through. And I totally agree with that. There's nothing in the mechanisms that suggest you're making anything but just a regular city. Outside of your little milk house and your little ice cream tower or whatever, you don't really feel like you're dealing with candy. In fact, the resources in the game are wood, iron, and wheat. This could have and probably started as just a regular city building game. And somewhere along the line, this theme of the Candyland came out, but that's not represented at all. And that's a real shame. That's a missed opportunity. It's a little bit of a two-edged sword because, you know, when you name your game Sweetlands, it sets an expectation that there's going to be something about that in the mechanisms. And when it's just painted on, that does result in a little bit of I don't know, it's disappointing. Like, imagine instead this was set in the future and the game's name like 2541, and then it's just a regular city builder. You know, you're going to be like, Why was this set in 2541? What, like, shouldn't there be, like, I don't know, fancy robots and floating buildings? Or shouldn't there be something? Shouldn't there be a reason why it's set in the future? Well, I gotta ask the same question here. Shouldn't there be a reason why this is a candy land? Why this is the sweet lands? Why are we using wood? I don't know. I'm definitely not a theme Nazi. You know, I'm a Eurogame lover, and they very rarely have really vibrant themes. So, you know, it's not the end of the world for me personally, but if you were excited about Sweetlands because of the theme, then I would look somewhere else. Now, let's briefly talk about the solo mode. So if you saw my videos, you saw just how streamlined this solo mode is. It's basically non-existent. All you do is at the beginning of each round, you flip over 2 cards and you block those worker placement spots. That's it. And then at the end of the round, you just block the previous space that you went to for those bonus tiles. And then you're just trying to get to 250 points to win. That's it. That's the solo mode. There's no automa you need to worry about or anything like that. There's really no setup at all. On the one hand, that's great because it lets you just play Sweetlands. Like I said at the beginning, this is a low interaction game. So even in a multiplayer game, you pretty much be doing your own stuff. The sole points of interaction are with those worker placement spots, with those bonus tiles, and then 2 more that aren't really present in the solo game. There's turn order, which matters for the worker placement spots. But then there's also a bit of a race on those tracks to get to the final spot. Because if you're the first person to reach that final spot on one of those 6 tracks, you get a little bonus. Other than that, you're building on your own map. You know, you have sort of your own world that you're dealing with. Even with the cards, you're just drawing off the top of the deck. There's not like an open draft where you might steal cards that other people might want or anything like that. So very, very low interaction. With a low interaction game, you want to have a streamlined, lightweight solo. There's just no reason to waste your time dealing with something, you know, complex or having to make moves for another player when it has nothing to do with what you're doing. It's not going to impact you in any way. So I'm glad they went with a really lightweight solo mode. The question is it too lightweight? Could they maybe have added just a tiny bit more? Because we are missing out on a little bit of the tension that there might be with those worker placement spots. Because you're just sort of blocking them all right at the beginning, there's no mystery, right? It's just that happens, and now you just need to puzzle your way through it. So there's 2 problems there. One, I think having that little bit of drama of like, I take a turn and then the bot blocks a space. I take a turn, the bot blocks a different space. That would at least force me to think, ooh, maybe I should take this worker placement spot first, just in case. That would add a little bit of tension that would be present in the multiplayer game. And that's a big deal if they take those spots, because discarding 1 card versus discarding 2 cards, that's a big deal. And that kind of brings me to the second problem, which is I rarely ever had to spend 2 cards to take an action. And I have no idea why they have 3 spaces there, because I never have gone to the 3 card space. The worker placement spots are a little bit open. Part of the reason is because there's a spot where you can go to just get an action marker that you can then place for free. So I can get that action marker for 1 card, and then I could play it onto a 2 or 3 card spot and not have to pay. And so in the solo game, if the bot doesn't block that spot, then you just go there, you get that. That's just sort of an automatic thing that you do. And then you're basically paying 1 card per action, kind of no matter what. There's also that spot that lets you go discard 1 card to get 2. And so that's just an extra card, basically an extra action. And so even if for some reason you did need to go to a spot and spend 2 cards, you could go there, get those 2 cards, and then it's basically equivalent of spending 1. And very rarely does the bot block both of those spaces. So each round you're getting either one or the other most of the time. So it just felt very open. I don't know. Now, of course, when you go to a spot, you're blocking it. So then if you wanted to take the same action twice, you know, then that would be expensive. I didn't find myself doing that very often. Now that might be, I'm just not a very good player. Again, this is a first impressions, but I did find that worker placement to be pretty open. I would have liked that to have been tighter. I think I would want the bot to block more spaces. Even if that meant, you had to bring down the winning score to like 200 or something like that because you couldn't do everything that you wanted. I prefer a tighter game. So if you're someone who likes a really wide open game where you can kind of do whatever you want, this is definitely more in that line than like, say, a Vital Lacerda game, which tend to be very tight. And in the same vein, I kind of felt like I accomplished too much. Like, you can't do everything. And there are several different paths to victory and different strategies that you can employ. Like in my playthrough, I completely ignored bunnies, for example. You could really focus on bunnies and get a bunch of points. So there's definitely some different ways of doing things. But you do end up accomplishing a lot, at least in the solo game. My only last little critique is that because you have that huge stack of cards, those 200 cards, and you're just drawing from the top, it is a little random what cards you see. You're really just drawing cards and seeing if anything kind of works with what you're doing or if anything makes sense. There's no real planning you can do there. That didn't bother me, but if you're someone who gets kind of riled up by that luck of the draw sort of thing, then this may be a sticking point for you. Ultimately, I'm a really big fan of this game. I recommend it. Please check out the playthrough first to see if it's something that you might like. But there we go. I think I've rambled for long enough. Those were my first impressions of Sweetlands. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.